Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. Ambitious, just together.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed delegates, distinguished guests, it is with great pleasure and enthusiasm to extend a warm welcome to each and every one of you who joins our meeting, our international event on achieving Article 2.1, letter C, transforming the financial system for low-emission and resilient real economy, organized by the DZ Bank, by the UN High-Level Champions, and by the UN ECE and ISIS Germany. Together we thank the organizers of the German Pavilion for inviting us and hosting us here today. Our focus of this gathering is, as I said, Article 2.1, the key element for the global effort to combat climate change. We are honored to host senior executives from the real economy transition champions and experienced policymakers and accomplished financial practitioners who will discuss and demonstrate the potential of transition finance. Ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations Climate Change Conference is the most important forum to discuss climate change globally and the best chance we all have to achieve global climate action. This COP matters more than ever because, and not least, it is the first global stocktake. There's a unique opportunity at this COP to go beyond negotiations and, like Paris in 2016, to create a long-lasting legacy, a legacy for action. So I'm very relieved that at the beginning, at the kickoff of COP28, there was a landmark agreement on the loss and damage fund. But knowing what is at stake, we all also know that the COP has to deliver far more. The International Chamber of Commerce is calling for tangible and practical results in 3 key areas. Among them, we call for a practical action plan to transform climate financing arrangements. This COP must deliver a very concrete action plan for the post-2025 climate finance. From a business perspective, a joint action plan is needed to better align the global financial system with the goals of the Paris Agreement, including creating an enabling environment for the private sector investment and ensuring that climate finance is not available but also affordable in developing countries. And with that, I want to thank you very much again for coming, and I hand over to Markus for the moderation of, I think, the rest of the evening. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Oliver. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the DZ Bank, a very warm welcome. My name is Markus Prasch. I'm head of Sustainable Bonds and Finance and running the Sustainable Capital Markets business of the DZ Bank. The American poet John Sardi once said, "A good question is never answered. It's not a board to be tightened into place, but a seed to be planted and to be more seed towards the hope of greening the landscape of ideas." In today's debate, we are going to tackle various good questions on the necessity and practicability of sustainable finance. We won't be able to find a definite answer to all of those questions. However, I'm confident that we can find out ways to align the financial system with the sustainable development in a fruitful manner. With these words, I'm now delighted to hand over to one of our hosts here from the German federal government, Dr. Esther Wandel. She's Head of Investment Funds and Sustainable Finance at the German Federal Ministry of Finance. Esther, the floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much for inviting me here and organizing this event. I would like also to pass on the best regards of Mr. Tonka, our Parliamentary State Secretary, who had loved to be here tonight, but unfortunately he had to stay in Germany for some domestic issues. So I would also like to congratulate the organizers of this event for the title, because I think it's a very good title, because it combines 2 very, very important elements of this overall debate, and sometimes one is neglected and sometimes the other is neglected. It contains finance and it contains also real economy. And I think this is absolutely tremendously important, because sometimes, look, I am heading a team or a division which is in charge of sustainable finance. And obviously we look at the world from a finance angle, and that's absolutely fine and good. But at the same time, I mean, we should never forget what it is all ultimate about. It's about transforming the real economy. And I think when we discuss these issues, and I liked yesterday, the Z Bank organized also together with UNN a very interesting event where some speaker from the audience and said, look, what we need is really the bridge between the both. And I think that is very nicely reflected in this title, and I hope that will be something we will hear and discuss about later more in this event, because I think this is tremendously important. So that is the first message. The second message I would like to pass is something which I think is equally important and which is a little bit missing from that title, to be honest. That's the issue of transition. Because, as you know, particularly in Europe, but maybe also elsewhere, we're very much focused on the green, being dark green, being the gold standard. And obviously that's absolutely important, because we have to set out these goals. But we should not forget that there is something in between, and that there are many corporates and firms which are on their way on that transition. And that we have to accompany in an efficient and credible way by finance. Because otherwise we keep on financing all those which are already there and not move on. This might be a little bit specific for you, but I think it's a general thought to be kept in mind. And the third message I would like to make is, I think that is something we had also already discussed in that event yesterday. When we talk about the real economy, I think people understand different things by that, but particularly for Germany, but not only for Germany, SMEs are really important. They are the backbone of the transition. They are the backbone of the German economy, but also of many other economies. When you look at the figures, they are not that different also for many other countries in the world. And I think that's the third issue we should look at. We should not forget that when we talk about transition, we have to take SMEs along. We have to look at their needs. We should not overburden them with, let's say, bureaucratic issues and demands, but giving them the chance to really organize their transformation and get that accompanied by the financial sector. I hope that you will have a very fruitful and interesting debate in this regard. I'm very curious to learn and hear about it, and I wish you a great evening. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Esther, and good to see that our government is here to solve global challenges, but also is at home to solve local problems. Next, I'm very much delighted now that my next guest on stage will be Bianca Neumann. She's Chair of Resource Management of the Young Member Group of one of our partners, the UNECE. Bianca, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Today I stand here not only as a representative of UNECE, but as an individual that will carry the burden put upon us by the past and the current generation. Though I've had the privilege to be born in a country in which I never had to question my place or my peace, I know that today and also in the past, this has not been the case for many others. So please let me start my remarks by emphasizing that the pain inflicted upon by many countries and financial institutions of the global north is irreparable. We cannot repeat the same mistakes for future generations. So we have to do everything we can to ensure peace and sustainability for everyone. Then the question is, how do we do that? Article 2.1 of the Paris Agreement encompasses making financial flows consistent with low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. I may be stating the obvious here, but we need to transform the sustainable financial system in order to achieve the climate finance goals. So it's not about the what, but the how. Financial allocators need quality, holistic, and transparent data about the projects they're investing in. While there has been some progress on the disclosure frameworks, we are not yet where we need to be. They do not seem to give enough information, enough data, and enough detail about the capital allocation need, nor does it have global consistency. It's not harmonized. And it kind of pains me to see and to say, but the discussions around needing better data for sustainable investment decision-making has been going on for years. And we haven't really done enough steps. So, what do we do? What should the next step be like? Well, if I had the answer, I would probably not be standing here. But I have some experience and probably a different perspective than many of you, so let me draw a little parallel from my field, which is resource management. The United Nations Framework Classification for Resources, short UNFC, is a tool for classification of energy resource projects, including renewables, fossil fuels, gas, hydrogen projects, anthropogenic resources, and more. It's a tool that provides nuanced information about the different aspects of respective resource projects, including economic viability, technical feasibility, and also socioeconomic factors. It's not only for financial allocators, it's for every stakeholder that is interested in holistic and quality data about resource projects. So also governments and civil society and technical experts, meaning the industry. So it's inclusive, kind of. What does that mean for the practice for finance? It means that with UNFC, decision makers could assess which ones of the different resource projects in different parts of the world would be best for their specific needs. They could compare the lithium mine project in Chile with the recycling project in Germany and then with another bioenergy project in a different part of the world. They could look at the economic, technical, and socioeconomic aspects related to that project and then weigh them up and decide what's best for their goals, globally and across sectors. That doesn't exist right now. UNFC developers are financial allocators, but also governments, also industry experts, and also civil society, including the youth. It holds the potential to become the catalyst for cross-cutting collaboration for data availability and sustainable development. And achieving the 1.5 degree will need more collaboration. It needs system thinking, it needs innovative tools, it needs dynamic changes. It will need combined efforts by everyone. It will take those of you who are investors and financial institutions to engage with your portfolio companies, with your value chains, with your policymakers, with your stakeholders. And we need you to engage hard, like you really, really mean it. We need corporate transition plans to provide short, medium, and long-term targets, as well as the financial, policy, operational, and governance mechanisms that actually deliver on these mechanisms. So I ask you to try harder, to help finding out which way will lead us to where we need to be. I ask you to engage with impacted communities like the youth. Because though it may seem that we are from different dialectic fields, we are deeply implicated in each other's decision-makings. In my role as the chair for the Resource Management Young Member Group, I'm lucky enough to get to work with fantastic and inspiring minds. But they're often operating in isolated fields, not being included in solution finding processes, and that really bothers me. Because we are driven by the knowledge that every ounce of work that you and we are not putting in today will we have to put in 3 times as much by future generations. I'm not only calling you to continue to collaborate on conferences like these, but also to take home what's being said here. When you go back to your work, to your meetings, take one thing you learned here, one thing you heard, and include them into your practices. Maybe it's UNFC, maybe it's including other stakeholders like the youth, or maybe it's something entirely different. But please choose one thing, at least one thing, and make a change back home, because maybe that's the change we need. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bianca, for this wake-up call. I think something everyone should consider. I have now the pleasure to welcome Dr. Ariane Freitag. She's CFO of TenneT, and she will talk about Europe's energy future. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I firstly must disappoint you. I'm not the CFO of TenneT. I'm just Vera Brenzel. But anyway, I'm very pleased to be here today. I'm in charge of public affairs, communication, and community relationship management. When I read this title, and actually I obviously had to write the speech for Arina, so I'm happy to say what she was supposed to say. There was one thing that came through my mind. When I came from the airport, I mean, we all came here in odd times, totally over, lack of sleep, too hot, coming from snowy Europe, or northern hemisphere, and I had a very enchanted taxi driver. He said, like, you know what, we're going green. We're building 1,000 megawatt per annum, which is not a lot, but for Dubai, it is a heck of a lot. PV solar panels. And I said, well, what does that mean for us? I mean, are we bringing that joy and that motivation, that mobilization back into, do we take that to our streets? I think that we have enough reasons to do so. And my job today is about, the role of the energy industry or the energy future. And I would like to say one thing. I think this transformation, especially the infrastructure, and I think you've all read it in The Economist, you've read it with Bloomberg, you've read it with different studies, is one of the largest investments that we're doing to enable this transition. It's an anticipatory, exercise in order to make all those renewables accessible to our societies. But it also means that we have to take responsibility because it's taxpayers' money in the end, or it is grid grid fee payers' money. And I was just looking at ambitious, just, and together. I think the just element is getting much more on the agenda these days. And I'm saying the following. I mean, the European NSOE, so the European Union grid operators, they will invest, and I'm only talking about the high grid, the very big, large grids. They're investing 700 billion into grids until 2030. And that means that we need to make sure that, first of all, we tap all kinds of resource efficiencies. The resource efficiencies, I'm not going to bore you because it doesn't fit to the title, which means really doubling down in half the time, using larger equipment, scaling, standardizing, interoperability, and allowing, etc. But what is really, really important here is to get access to cheap capital, or the cheapest capital possible. Avoid transaction costs that we're paying today because we have, I'd say, insufficient transparency. We have a bias or asymmetric information out there. And we have those who want to put their money somewhere in wrong assets very often. I mean, Europe and Germany especially, they have a very strong equity towards, debt capital ratio. We have to learn from the Americans. They have a much better, I mean, we talk about 120 to ratio in Germany to a 43% ratio in the US. And that means we need much more, we have to ensure society that we de-risk. We can provide money and assets and investments also for, for somebody who is not knowledgeable in a field. And that means that one of the topics that is also tonight on a different venue, it's about capital market union. I do think this is a very big lever and that can unleash, first of all, more access to capital, more access to also to an investment that is a social and just investment that we're doing. We're trying to get the best out of it. So I do think it would be really, really helpful if we could use that skills that are being developed by the European Commission and the European Union to bring that into our societies, meaning reduce bureaucracy, get them the transparency that they need to put their money, make sure that they don't pay a risk premium that they cannot, first of all, not afford, and second of all, that they would have to pay because they have a lack of information. That brings me to the next level. What does it mean if you have to invest such a big amount of money? It means that today we already know what our targets are going to be in 2050 in Europe. We know in Germany what our grid of the future will look like. So it is very important that you look at what is the goal and how can we backcast to make sure that today we take the right decisions. Because there's a big path dependency, we all know that. But there's a no regret, and I think building grids is a no regret, especially because we have an electrification that is extending to other areas, and we're doubling the electricity demand, at least in Europe, most likely also in other parts of the world. So that brings me back to this gentleman who was very proudly saying, well, we're really building a green future here in Dubai. Obviously, they earn their money with other, there are other revenue streams, but I think making the smartest bit out of it is super important. So my 3 takeaways for tonight are 3 no regrets. The first no regret is build fast, grids, because if we do not have anticipatory investments, we don't have the renewables to be connected. And just to give you a number, the IEA roughly says 80 million kilometers that we have today need to be doubled in order to connect those 80% new investments that are going to be in renewables for the electricity generation. And I think that is one no regret. The second no regret, I would say, make sure that you lift all the efficiency potentials possible. Capital access, scale, standards, transparency, and that's not only for capital but also for assets. How to do that? We have an open standard, for example, for a new converter station. It's power electronics that not everybody has developed it, so we say, well, use it. It's there for society. And the third no regret is if we do not make it with our societies and we don't get those taxi drivers really engaged and also motivated to deliver this energy transition. And I'm looking at the poll exits that we have, the people taking to the polls in a very, very right swing, especially in Europe. I think it is super important that we continue leading where we can be in a good example. And I think Europe can be a good example because we have a European network system operation. Where we do have one set of conduct for market rules, for technical rules, and we have a long-haul transport system that makes it possible to connect and to use those renewables where they're needed. But also use what the Americans have done, easy, low access, low barriers to access investments. And that was my pledge for tonight. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, and especially for elaborating the 3 no regrets. Last but not least, I would now welcome Bruno Carrasco. He is Director General, Climate Change and Sustainable Development at the Asian Development Bank, and he will elaborate on achieving Article 2.1c in Asia. Bruno, welcome.
Very good evening to all of you. It's my pleasure to join you in this lovely green German pavilion, very colorful at that. I am delighted to be in the company of such great participants. Dr. Esther from the Federal Ministry of Finance in Germany, Mr. Oliver Wick from General Secretary ICC Germany, representatives from DZ Bank, from UNECE, from Race to Resilience, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. It's really an honor to address you today in transforming climate finance in Asia and the Pacific. The Asian Development Bank has recently positioned itself as the climate bank for Asia and the Pacific. We've got a lot of work to do. Asia Pacific, as many of you know, contributes over 50% of global greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, if you look at it from the opposite side, Asia and the Pacific is increasingly feeling the impact of the climate-augmented natural disasters. The Asian Development Bank is headquartered in Manila, Philippines. I've been there since the early 90s. We see greater typhoons, greater hurricanes, greater impact. It's no longer observing the seasonality that we used to see. And as we've seen across other parts of Asia Pacific, like the tragic floods last year in Pakistan, the penny has dropped. Yeah? There is a recognition that everyone has to contribute, everyone has to be part of the solution, and within that context, Asian Development Bank is very proud to have stepped up in terms of its positioning as a climate bank. We need to recognize two things: that if we are going to contain temperature rise, we need to act fast and we need to act at scale. This is what drives us, and we recognize the urgency as we move from one COP to the other. Our fight against climate change is critically linked to our ability to mobilize and direct finance to achieve the objectives of Article 2. Without sufficient and sustained financial support, our efforts to mitigate, to adapt, and to enhance resilience on climate impacts will be unattainable. Simple as that. The Asia-Pacific region, as I've mentioned, is a very significant contributor. There is great understanding, and as a regional development bank, we have our work cut out for us. I'd like to just briefly touch on four aspects of how we're addressing this climate crisis. So first of all, back in Glasgow, over 2 years ago, our president, Masa Asakawa, committed to raising the level of ambition of our climate finance from 80 billion to 100 billion, and that was over a period 2019 to 2030. That was a very important step. It followed on the approval of our energy policy, which said categorically no to new coal. We have decomposed the $100 billion, and I wanted to mention that of that 100 billion, 12 billion is to be sourced from our non-sovereign, our private sector department. And we do hope that through these investments, we can scale up an additional $18 to $30 billion from the private sector, from the market. I wanted to mention that we started slowly because the 2019 period soon led to the difficulties that we saw with COVID-19. Last year, we were able to deliver 6.7 billion. This year, we're on record to probably hit around anywhere between 9 to 10 billion. So we're on that road towards the 100 billion. We need to bend that curve still a little further, and we recognize that we've got a lot of work still to do, but we're confident that we can achieve those goals. Our increased climate finance ambition is very much linked to the Paris alignment of our operations. So by July of this year, we had 100% alignment both on the sovereign as well as on the non-sovereign portfolio. And that was a great achievement because there was the concern, the risks that our operations could be disrupted as a result of that. We have managed to reach that target, and we are confident that we will continue with this. I think secondly, I wanted to mention that of the $100 billion level of ambition, we've got about $66 billion going into mitigation, $34 billion going into adaptation. Adaptation is in some ways harder, but we recognize that we have to work across both fronts. To date, we have been working very closely with some of our member countries to lift the level of ambition. The other countries have committed to net zero targets. They've got their national determined contributions, their national adaptation plans, but some of these are not ambitious enough. So we have to work with them. We have technical assistance. We sit with them. We look at their policies. We look at their investments, and we work towards getting a more realistic and ambitious level of pathways towards the net zero goals. In terms of capacity building, we do recognize that countries have a limited ability to absorb some of that climate funding, and we need to work closely with them to be able to enhance that capacity. I wanted also to mention that our scaled-up support for climate change adaptation extends to minimizing and addressing loss and damage, a very important subject, through investments in such things as early warning systems. We just launched 2 days ago the Himalaya Kush multi-risk initiative. The third pole in the world is the Hindu Kush. We've got the largest glacier volume after the Arctic and the Antarctic. That is melting. It's melting fast. It's breaking the reservoirs, and we're seeing more and more risks of flooding, destruction of lives, livelihood, and we've got to work in terms of early warning systems, disaster risk management practices, and we need to link those efforts across climate, across environment, and across disaster risk management. I would also like to mention, as the third point, the importance of using what we do best, our balance sheet. We have taken up many innovative financing facilities. You may have heard some of them. We have the Innovative Financing Facility for Climate in Asia and the Pacific, IFCAP, and here what we're doing is we're basically looking at being able to provide an additionality of $15 billion for every dollar contributed through this window. We can scale up to 5 times through the guarantees facilities that are available. We're working hard towards being able to scale up further. Another important initiative is the Energy Transition Mechanism, which looks at probably one of the most serious problems in Asia Pacific, and that is the stock of coal power plants. Countries like Indonesia have a large pipeline of coal-powered projects that are coming in. We have to stop that. We can stop the flows, but we need to stop also and reduce the stock. So what we do there is we're trying to help the transition be able to decommission the coal power plants soon enough. We don't want them to continue operating for 20, 30 years. We want to reduce that time. And in the meantime, if we're able to break through, we're able to convert some of that energy into renewable energy. This is a very important initiative that we have. It's a difficult initiative, it's complex, but with some effort we will be able to make that. Just 2 days ago we signed a framework agreement with Cirebon, which is the coal-fired power plant that we're working with. So again, a lot of innovations, a lot of project financing. We need to look at blended finance solutions to be able to buy out the owners, and in that process move towards a steadier model of phasing out coal power plants. Last point on this, in terms of the MDB evolution that all of you are probably familiar with, ADB has been working hard under its capital adequacy framework. We have been able to identify up to $10 billion a year for the next 10 years as a way to further expand our lending headroom. So another very important initiative. I think fourth point I wanted to mention is we're supporting our developing member countries in preparing that just transition. The transition will not happen unless we're able to help and address some of those challenges that we see as we have to move people, communities, aside from coal, from fossils, and into the new technologies. We do recognize that Asia Pacific is growing. That allows the transition that becomes much more easy than in other parts of the world. But at the same time, we need to recognize there's a reskilling, there's a retraining, there's labor considerations, so that it has to be part of the parcel of the solutions. I think that perhaps the last point that I wanted to make is we launched the Just Transition Support Platform in Egypt last year at the COP27. And this is to, again, help countries to develop that capacity to be able to recognize what reforms they need to take to be able to attract greater private investment to make this happen. This is a very important point. My last point, we just launched 2 days ago the Climate Change Action Plan for the Asian Development Bank. It talks about how we're going to lead this transition. It sets out a comprehensive roadmap on climate outcomes and how we can deliver more effectively by faster and at scale operations to address this climate challenge across Asia and the Pacific. I think I want to end by mentioning that President Asakawa often talks about the battle against climate change will be won or lost in Asia and the Pacific, yeah? Size of the economies, the manufacturing hubs, etc. We need to get this battle won in Asia and the Pacific. We want to work closely with all of you to be able to attract the funding that is required, and with that, be able to share a more prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia and the Pacific. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bruno, and happy to support you to win this battle. I'm now delighted to invite 5 experts here on the panel, elaborating a little bit with me how we can achieve the Article 2.1 through sustainable finance. Please come on the stage. As you like. While I will quickly introduce each of the panelists, I will also ask each panelist to give a short statement, 1 or 2 sentences, very short, which have been the biggest hurdles in achieving Article 2.1c so far. So I'm very happy to welcome Helga Flores-Trejo. She's Vice President and International Multilateral Affairs at Bayer. So from your point of view, which are the biggest hurdles so far?
Well, first of all, thank you. It's amazing at this time of the day. It's been long for all of us, I think, that we still are all here in this conversation in the room, and certainly whoever is following virtually. I think it shows the commitment, no matter what. So you talk about the hurdles. Yeah, they are many, but it shows also the commitment. I also want to mention, I needed to introduce myself? Is that what you said?
No.
Okay, sorry. I think I like what you said, right? We're talking about the real economy. And certainly in a company like Bayer that moves in between both health and agriculture and nutrition, we are squarely moving in what you call the real economy. And at the same time, in something that if I might say, I'm very happy about, that in this UN climate conference, we are putting people very much at the center of that real economy and just the basic needs. And when it comes to another word that you mentioned, the transition itself, I think for us, it's very clear that there's no transition if we are not able to meet the really basic needs of big parts of the world. So in terms of just transition, in terms of food and health. And I don't want to go further, but I do think that at a higher level, that those are some of the hurdles. Certainly, I think we have two competing, both equally important objectives, if you will. One, transparency, and the other is the complexity. How do you manage to get the right balance between the needed transparency, the needed clarity for investors in order to really make sure that the flow of capital goes to the right place without making the whole thing so complex that nobody can meet it? So how do we make the perfect, not that the perfect is the enemy of making progress? I would like to at least start with that. I think that's a challenge we all have.
Okay, thank you very much. So my next guest is Audrey Cynthia Yamat-Yaco. She's coordinator of the African Green Banks Initiative, Green Climate Fund, focal point of African Development Bank. So from your point of view, Audrey, which are the biggest hurdles?
Thank you. Good evening. So the biggest hurdle for the African region is the lack of vehicle who can transform this green needs, our resilience development strategy into investment opportunity and into reality. So we need those kind of local vehicle to be created.
Okay, thank you very much. Next on stage is Dr. Stefan Büttner. He's Director Global Strategy and Impact, Institute for Energy Efficiency in Production, and Chair of Task Force on Industrial Energy Efficiency of the UNECE. So Stefan, the biggest hurdles from your point of view.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, there are many hurdles, but also many opportunities. And I believe that it is exactly this type of conversation that we need to trigger the decision for investment, for energy efficiency, and also decarbonization, but also enabling the stakeholders by the supply of these means. So the biggest hurdles is that the real economy struggles in so many ways and means at present, particularly, well, actually everybody. And that is including managing the costs, the daily costs, the increased costs, the difficulties in accessing what we need and wherever we are, while ensuring our operations, our day-to-day life, and managing also the disruption that we may be facing depending on if we are, for example, in the automotive industry or in many other sectors. And that while also increasing our desire for resilience, so to be more protected against all sorts of shocks and supply issues that we are facing, and not to forget to tackle the climate crisis, so lowering the emissions. So, and the obstacles here is not only the increasing issue with the availability of capital, so the energy price crisis as well as COVID has reduced the flexibility on that big time, the way how to access the funding, particularly for the smaller stakeholders, SMEs, and the involved transaction costs. And also enabling all the stakeholders involved to find the first step, or to mount the first step, as we have here on the stage, to tip over the first domino piece, because it's always the first big thing that we need to tip over to get going. And lastly, also trigger the decision to go for it, because we are not finance experts per se. These are people with very different realities, and whatever you do for the first time, it's with everything in our life, it feels risky. And we cannot assess the risk if we haven't done it before. Like if you build your first house. Afterwards, you are a semi-expert and you know what you would have done differently. So we need to find ways and means to reduce the perceived risk to the actual one, and there help each other in finding that path.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Next on stage is Martin Ostermann. He's head of hospitality of the Dr. Christian Hirmer Group, and he's standing in for Christian Hirmer, who was affected by climate change because due to the bad weather conditions, he was stranded in Bavaria and could not make it on time to Dubai. So Martin, from your point of view, which are the biggest hurdles so far?
Well, thank you first of all for having me, and I'm delighted to be here and represent such a visionary partner and colleague and family as the Hirmer Group and Dr. Christian Hirmer, who represents both the tradition as well as the vision behind what the group does, being known as one of the largest and best known addresses for men's fashion, traditionally in over 3 generations, but also like a modern corporation pursuing many projects in the direction of future-oriented investments, and that's where the challenges come in. For us, the main thing in various sectors, I represent one of them, which is hospitality, and we get to that later, but in various sectors of a privately held company, the lack of transparency and the lack of a clear flow of capital that's required to be deployed towards sustainable solutions, towards solutions that can help businesses in general be more effective when it comes to climate change and battling, as it was mentioned before, that phenomena. That's one thing that we feel strongly as a challenge, and how it impacts our business. And then secondly, I think we all face this, the pace and the speed at which investments need to happen that pursue that ultimate goal of capping us at 1.5 degrees warming is just too slow. We need to do that 3 times as fast if we want to reach the goals, at least by the end of the decade that were agreed in Article 2.1c. And as such, there need to be just more transparent, digital, any kind of solutions that are supported that we can access today, technology, whatever, but also the cooperation and the closing of the gap between the private and the public sector when it comes to the capital itself, to make it more attractive, more transparent to the global capital markets, because otherwise we're just all going to face the same exact challenge. We have great ideas we want to implement and put to life amazing solutions. We can't get the money to flow. That's sort of where we stand on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Last but not least, pleasure to welcome Benedict Libanda. He's CEO of the Environmental Investment Fund of Namibia. So Benedict, from your point of view, which are the biggest hurdles so far?
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here today. I always like the factor of 3. I think from a bankability point of view, it's a cost of capital. From a risk point of view is the lack of appetite for institutional investors to participate at early stage of development for projects. So that is a second most important one as a challenge. And lastly, perhaps the most important is that there is different pockets of capital on the market, and these pockets behaves differently. If you look at multilateral funds, they've got different, adjusted, risk mechanisms. If you look at commercial banks, DFIs, institutional investors such as pension funds, asset managers, they've got all different behaviors, and there's no coordinated fashion to bring all this pocket of capital to finance the much needed transition that we require. And that's a challenge on itself, and an opportunity to create such platform of coordinating these different pockets of capital.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go a little bit into the individual discussion, what you and your companies are doing. So Helga, from your point of view, what do you think is currently holding back greater efforts to intensify transition finance?
Can I just comment one thing? I think also because I worked at the Multilateral Development Bank before, and probably we do see the changes now in terms of understanding maybe the risk appetite and changing the risk appetite. And I liked something that I heard from one of the representatives of a regional development bank. And he said, we really need to stop behaving like an investor and behave now like a catalysator. It's a different mindset, different risk appetite, but I agree with you that certainly just completely different approaches and probably not fast enough to what we need to do. From a company perspective, I think it's essential because we are now transitional finance is essential because we're moving from the setting of targets to really doing it and implementing. But what we need is a level playing field. Mm-hmm. The worst is different approaches. If one country manages in a very strict 1.5 approach and another it doesn't, how do you have competitiveness challenge? So for us as a company, that general differences, we cannot control them. So what does it mean for us? That we need to, what we control, manage it. What is helping for us? This is what we did. First, of course, we have a very clear 1.5 path. Also based on SBTI, and we have not only a 2050 but a 2030 reduction of 42%. the key thing that we have established for us is, for example, an internal carbon pricing. We have an internal carbon price of 100 euro per ton, metric ton. And that is essential because it allows us then to prioritize in terms of capital expenditures that transformation. That's something that we are doing independently of what happens externally. This is something that helps for us to move and manage that transformation.
Okay, thank you very much. Stefan, you.
If I may just to complement that, in addition to the internal price of carbon, quite some companies have also, unfortunately not enough, but some have experimented with an approach where they bundle the responsibility for investments with the ongoing purchase of energy. Because if you have both, it's the same. If one entity owns the building and another one pays the bills, there's the issue of why should I invest, because then I can't invest elsewhere. But if the responsibility for that is in the same hand, or at least coordinated, you look more at the bigger picture.
Thank you. Audrey, what is the climate finance ambition of the African Development Bank for Africa?
The African Development Bank see the lack of climate finance as the biggest impediment for our regional members' country development, sustainable development. We are committed. We are committing our own capital to double the internal climate finance. So we are doubling our ambition and set the target of 25 billion by 2025 in climate investment. So we allocate around 40% of our internal climate finance, financing to climate. And we are also working hand in hand with global partners to increase the current level of 3% of global climate finance channel to the African continent to 10%. We are developing a different type of instruments such as the climate action windows, which aim to mobilize 13 billion for 37 African countries, which are the most vulnerable to climate change. We are also, such as our sister Asian Development Bank, developing mechanisms who are allowing free liquidity to invest more in climate finance. But we are also identifying innovative financial models, such as the green banks, to turn this investment opportunity, this 2.8 trillion investment opportunity by 2030, into reality. So how do we work efficiently? How do we work with this green banks model? So those green banks model can be public, quasi-public, or private, thematic and financial institution. They aim to mobilize blended financing and towards and channel it towards into relevant projects. They can be created from scratch. It can be a national green banks, but it can also be hosted in an existing financial institution, which make it local, very efficient, and practical as well to mobilize domestic currency and reduce the cost of those green investments. So they have the capacity to provide the bespoke financing instrument, de-risking instrument, to allow private capital to step into those transactions, and they have also project preparation facility to make sure that the pipeline of project is well structured and bankable. So such innovative mechanisms are very critical to achieve this transformation, the transformation of the financial system to achieve this the objective of the Article 2.1c. Since we are covering and tackling the challenges of having now tailored investment adapt to country needs, countries' NDCs and investment strategy, green strategy. We have, through this model as well, we will see a strong pipeline, well-structured pipeline of bankable projects coming from country and SMEs and entrepreneurs. We will see they will provide the risking instrument to increase the appetite of green investor and increase the capacity to mobilize domestic fundings and as well as private capital, which is critical, especially in Africa, where 87% of the climate funding comes from the public sector. So there is a huge arena for private capital to step in. And also, so those vehicles will also be able to create new financial products to mobilize domestic savings toward this public objective.
Okay, thank you very much. Martin, you already elaborated the Dr. Christian Hilmer group is very diverse. So maybe could you elaborate a little bit? How is your focus on sustainability? You already mentioned future-oriented projects. I've read something about disaster protection you're currently doing. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on this.
Sure. I mean, there's quite of a visionary approach to by Dr. Christian Hilmer to take the company to the next level, to address a lot of these issues, pressing issues that we have at hand. You mentioned the disasters. I mean, we every day, there's not a day in the news, and this might have been a minor disaster, but just getting here on time was a bit of a disaster, and that's driven by climate change, which was a very unforeseen event. How do we as a company, or what's the vision of Dr. Christian Hilmer to address that as a company? Is twofold. One, there's an expansion in the real estate and particularly the hospitality sector, which I help oversee, and that might raise some eyebrows as an answer to this question, because luxury hospitality or luxury lifestyle seems to be the culprit of to some extent of climate change and of wasting energy and so on and so forth. But we see a great vast opportunity there to use that as an application platform for a lot of technologies that help with specifically the efficiency and savings that can be achieved, in particular when it comes to water. And I get to the disaster relief in a minute. But Dr. Hilmer's high social standards and personal commitment and focus on sustainability led him to, about 10 years ago, develop a boutique luxury resort in the northern part, in the state of Bahia in Brazil, that has become quite famous, but it was done addressing some of these earlier comments that I made in a very clear and supportive collaboration with the local authorities and the government on how to get funds invested and get funds for certain technologies and strategies and whatever implemented in what eventually has become a luxury boutique beach resort, but it was done in a fully self-sustained, nature respectful property that has technologies incorporated that recycle rainwater, that recycle gray water, that reuse water, where we actually have achieved a model that is now being thought through as being one of the driving critical components of business modeling for the rest of the portfolio of hotels in particular, whereby we achieve savings of up to 50% of drinking of what otherwise could be potable drinking water in areas that have a lack of such. With currently a roughly €500 million portfolio that we're assessing in Europe and globally, that number, by having these technologies implemented early enough with solutions and support from the framework that we're hoping this discussion here at COP28 this year in Dubai around the Article 2.1c will achieve, that there's more clarity, more guidelines, faster move of funds, will also allow us to move these type of savings, and that's just water alone, up to 70% as one. Now, other efforts that are being made that link into all of that is collaboration and building a solutions platform with other partners and other companies that are very strong on various other aspects, such as disaster relief, very sustainable and ecological and economical pop-up support facilities, etc. And there's another component to that, which is ground protection for movement of these type of relief-related efforts that actually preserve the soil in the ground that's being done on. Because if you just plow through a forest and then later you have water just running down everywhere and landslides, that's also not really the right thing. So we're trying to think progressively. We're trying to think, what can we do to be active and proactive in the business model that the Dr. Christian Hilmer Group represents, and the future efforts that we're taking to address as many of these points. get to a finish line eventually.
Okay, thank you. Benedict, could you elaborate a little bit the work of your fund and what are the focal points helping to achieve Article 2.1c?
Hello. Yes, our fund is involved in the structuring of green investments for large-scale infrastructure in Namibia. I would say and argue that Namibia has got high ambitions towards low emissions economies. I'm saying so for two reasons. Yesterday, our president announced that we'll be developing about 20 gigawatts of renewable energy outputs within the next few years. Currently, at high peak, our national demand is 600 megawatts. So you can just imagine that ambition to 20 gigawatts. Then secondly, we do have large-scale green infrastructure that are in the pipeline to the value of $32 billion US dollars. And our GDP is $10 billion US dollars. So that's 3 times our GDP. So you can imagine the ambitions that we have in the country. And these infrastructures, these assets are green hydrogen and derivatives, rare earth green minerals, green iron, etc. etc. Includes methanol for the shipping industry, kerosols for the aviation industry. So these are all efforts to transform the economy of the country towards a net zero economy, as well as assist the global north to decarbonize through ammonia, green ammonia, as well as hydrogen. Now, with such a scale of projects, how do you deal with regards to financial investments, towards those large scales, assets at the backdrop of constrained government, government budget? So what we've done in Namibia, we've now established SDG Namibia 1. Now, Audrey referred to blended financing facilities. Now, I would just like to unpack blended financing in practice. So this SDG number 1, it's actually a blended financing platform that attracts different sorts of capital with the idea to de-risk, private capital, as well as reduce the cost of capital for this large-scale infrastructure. Under that fund, there are 2 different funds. There is a development fund, which is capitalized with $100 million US dollars. Then there's a construction equity fund with $1 billion US dollars. Under the development fund, this is what we use to support early stage development through grant funding. And the types of investors that place in that category are mainly donors, who provides us with grant funding. And under the construction fund, that's where we've got 3 tiers. There's preferred, equity and ordinary equity and shareholders loans participating in that tier. Most investors in that tier are institutional investors such as pension funds, as well as DFIs. Then the third one, which the third fund is the operation fund, mainly targeting, fixed income investors. These are commercial banks. So that's how we structured this fund, and it's managed by the Environmental Investment Fund in partnership with the climate fund managers, while the seed capital is provided by the Invest International from Netherlands. So this is a partnership program. It's already deploying capital on the ground. Just about 2 weeks ago, we approved our first investment on a early stage development for 40 million USD on a project called Hyphen Green Hydrogen Project. That's a 10.6 billion project with 4 gigawatts electrolyzer capacity, 300,000 tons of green hydrogen production per annum, 130,000 tons of ammonia. So I'm just unpacking this to demonstrate how blended financing can address some of the challenges that we face, especially the cost of capital. We have run some numbers, and we can clearly see that the cost of producing green hydrogen and green ammonia is 2 times more than gray ammonia or gray hydrogen. So if we use affordable capital, for example, a reduction in 1% weighted average cost of capital can reduce up to potentially 17% of the levelized cost of green hydrogen. And from a bankability perspective, that is extremely huge in terms of moving a project from development to FID. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before I would like the audience to ask a first round of questions, Stefan, very quickly. Is it always a matter of money? I mean, we talked a lot about capital, and has the situation changed a little bit during times, energy crisis, new geopolitical situation?
It has changed a lot indeed. The situation, as indicated earlier, there was more flexibility to act pre-COVID. But it's not only the access to the money, it's also the internal decision to go for it. Because there are so many things one could do as a business, and there you have a limited investment capital to hand, and then you look at what option helps me in what way. And if the money runs out, then you cannot implement everything, as we know now from the German budget. Therefore we need to be smart about it, and as Benedikt insinuated, we need to look at things more systemically. So what do we have to hand? Where do we need to end up at? What are our needs, our hardest pain points? Is it the desire to be resilient because we are not? Or is it the desire to withstand a disruption in my sector? Or is it the climate crisis? Or is it cost reduction because otherwise we won't be able to survive much longer? Or a combination of those, and then see what constellation of measures brings us to our desired outcome most efficiently overall, taking into consideration the conversion losses, etc., etc. And then at that point we need to change also a little bit the way of how we do economic viability assessments, because there we look at individual pieces, such as this bottle here or this mobile phone, because that is an overall challenge to businesses, meaning we need to expand the equation to the overall business and see by when do we need that, and then need to find out, okay, if the goal is say 2030, we have 6 years and a little bit left. So in what is overall the most economic solution by then? And that also means by incorporating the costs of inaction, and that is how much do I have to pay, or what do I suffer if I don't have access to materials, to personnel? If I'm dependent on a supplier of a particular type of energy, or to increasing emission prices. So there's lots of those things, but particularly the SMEs have a huge trouble. And that is also the way how funding programs are being structured. We have data that is a bit older, but there are 3/4 of SMEs, particularly the micro and small companies, indicated that they're not intending to go for any loan or funding program because of the bureaucracy involved. And I guess many of us face a similar thing. There could be a funding program, but in exploring that further could end up in a nightmare and cost more time. That is transaction costs, meaning money, meaning that this person cannot focus on actually getting things done. And that's what we need to keep in mind. So all the rules are great, but we need to direct it into action.
Okay, thank you. From ambition to action, so to say. I don't want to be the only one asking questions, so I'm looking at the audience. Any questions for our panelists? There's a question over there.
Now? Yes. Yeah, my name is Simon Pfluger. I am from the Sustainable Finance think tank Climate and Company. And my question would actually go to the HIRMA group. I was now investigating a little bit. Do you have a sustainability report? Because I couldn't find it.
Thank you. We do have internal reports for that, and progress and numbers that we track. They're not public, as we're building that new version of the future company of the Dr. Christian Hermer Group up with all those investments in mind. We have the hotel that I mentioned as our flagship, so to speak, and lighthouse project that illustrates how these investments work and how the savings that we can achieve can be tracked, and we do that internally on the property level. But there are a couple of other projects, and that will answer your question, that will lead into that will have to be obviously official third-party reports about that. One of the bigger investment projects and strategic projects that we're involved in is the development and building of a fully sustainable, self-sufficient new international airport in that same part of Brazil. And that's obviously going to go along with the government and with a lot of the regulations that need to be looked at for specifically airport operations. And yes, all those reports will be part of that. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Hello, thank you. I have a question, or rather two actually, probably more directed at Audrey and Benedict. So first of all, the need for, or really the fast need for increased infrastructure, particularly in transport and also in energy production. How is this merged with the interest to have a sustainable increase of energy production and sustainable transport, and particularly low-emission transport and energy production, which is occasionally opposed to each other, to have it both fast and with low emissions? And second, I'd be interested how funds and also the bank directs financing towards projects that are reducing emissions or avoiding emissions. So, for example, are there any kind of targets of funds or in general targets that need to be upheld of a minimum share of financing that is invested into green projects? Thank you.
Hello. Yes, on the infrastructure, if I understood your question very well on how to balance the kind of infrastructure in terms of low emission to the supporting sectors such as logistics, transportation, shipping, etc. That's right. So from where we stand in Namibia, first of all, Namibia is a net carbon sink. So we don't emit as much as we sequestrate. So decarbonization is really not such a huge factor for now. But at the same time, we are located in a geographical region that is high in solar radiation in the world, and with combination of high wind speed, and then next to vast pieces of land. So that provides Namibia a unique and a place where you can produce renewable energy at a much cheaper price as compared to the rest of the country, of the continent. Yeah. From the transportation sector, what we're doing in the country so far, we've built the first hydrogen refueling station in Africa. It's scheduled to open up in March next year. It's 10 megawatts. Secondly, we've come up with a green industrialization strategy. This is more of creating value chains along the economic system. One of the site that has been identified is our port of Loderis, port of Walvis Bay. It has entered into a partnership with the port of Rotterdam. So our port of Walvis Bay will be used as an international refueling for methanol for shipping industries that cross from Asia, Africa, then United States in the north. So that is one way of creating chains into the supporting value system of all the green industrialization agenda. I hope I answered your question very well.
Okay, thank you. Stefan, you had an intervention?
Complementing this. Being also an economist, I can't stop myself looking at the big picture as well. And if we just imagine for a moment, if we were to invest money and we want to get as furthest forward the quickest possible, I would look for a situation where what I invest triggers much more investment or would enable something else positive. And there, for instance, if we go to anywhere in the world where we don't have sufficient availability of green energy at this very moment of time, but potential, and would have the means to invest into energy generation. At that very moment of time, the energy demand may not exist locally, so therefore one could use electrolyzers, etc., to generate hydrogen and export that. However, the revenues from that need to remain locally to allow the expansion of the grid, establishing local energy consumption in industry, and then gradually decrease the amount of exports, and therefore increase the GDP of wherever that is, to then trigger further investments and further jobs and decarbonization, etc., much further.
Okay, thank you. Now I have a quick question for Helga. I mean, Bayer is a very much forerunner in the way to net zero, and we have a lot of maybe corporates also following us online today. So what could you recommend corporates, what kind of approach should they take to transform?
Well, it has been essential to absolute set those targets, and I think she said it at the beginning, right, with your steps towards. One part that we also have, after making sure that we reduced everything ourselves, is also certain incentives internally. I mentioned carbon price internally. Another one that we've said is also executive pay. And of course, you have to do your reductions, everything before that, but also making sure that from the top, the long-term payment of our board of managers, 20%, depends on us reaching those targets. And third, maybe just two, that in the same venue as you would how do you say, sorry, that you also have externally checked your targets, your ambitions, and of course the transparency, but in the same way that you would have notarized or analyze your commercial results, that you have that also externally analyzed and validated. I think those are all different parts from internal incentives and making sure that when we engage externally, it's transparent enough that it's also credible.
Okay, thank you very much. So before I hand over to Frank for the, given the time for the closing statement, I would like to have a short statement from every one of you to quickly drive forward achieving Article 2.1c. What do we need within the next 12 months to be done? So, Audrey, you would like to start?
What I would like to see in the next 12 months is the first green banks, for example, from Wanda, deploying green investment and showcasing how those local financial vehicles has a catalytic role to play to mobilize private fundings, but also unlock the fundings of large pipeline of green projects, and also see new vehicle created and onboarding the same journey.
Thank you. Helga, what do we need in the next 12 months to be done?
Sorry, I have to come back to what I started with, right? Standardization, alignment. Without that, everything else is complicated.
Okay. Thank you. Stefan.
Same here. A capillary distribution system of financing and technical assistance that actually connects the solution with the people and makes it feasible for them to act, makes it easy so that one really craves, okay, now I want to do it, immediately I want to stand up and get there. And that includes schemes such as pay-as-you-save, low-interest loans, or direct investment grants for those that could otherwise not lift the upfront investment.
Okay, thank you. Martin.
Sure, yeah. I think I'm just going to revert back to the question that was just asked in the audience. I think the reporting and the transparency and using those tools ultimately, which are currently our projections rather than reports because they're in the future, right? But using this ultimately to measure the success and to measure that required speed of how money flows between public and private and how we can contribute with our visions and our capital and our partners' capital to make that all happen, but have a mechanism and a tool to monitor that and to be able, to shift from one foot to the other, whichever direction required, if we see one working better than the other or not. And I think that's the valid question about the sustainability reports, and not just the reports, a reporting mechanism and tool, a live digital transparency platform that allows us to monitor that, not just in the conceptual phase, but also ultimately in the returns and in the results phase.
Thank you. Benedict.
Hello. Am I off? Okay. There are lots of projects in the pipeline globally, and I would like to see solutions that will increase project to bankability, to close financial, to reach financial close, FID. So far, the biggest green projects that we've seen so far is the NEOM one in Saudi Arabia. So we need to see more of that within the next 12 months. From a Namibian perspective, we would like to invite the African Development Bank, DBZ, to participate on our blended financing platform. We do have high quality projects, green projects, with good off-takers from South Korea, Germany, Japan, as well as Australia. So you are invited to contact me. Then I'll be happy to engage and provide you more information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I would now welcome my colleague and friend, Frank Scheidig on stage. He's the Global Head of Senior Executive Banking at DZ Bank, but he's also a member of the Sustainable Finance Advisory Committee of the German Federal Government for the closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much for all you who hold on to us here. And I can promise there's later on, not later on, in maximum 3 minutes from now, food and drinks. But first of all, thank you to the panelists. That was an interesting discussion, and I like your phrase, taking action. Hopefully it guides us to practical facts, because talking about it is one thing, but creating facts and figures, and I would encourage as well the NGFS. I guess the ADB is a member of that as well. African Development Bank is a member of that, so as many other MDBs. Central banks are members of that. But so far, they took parts of their reserves or money and invested into the global bonds, into the big ones with liquidity. I see the Commission is sitting here as being the largest issuer of green bonds and social bonds in this world. That's all good. But to be honest, if you really want to create impact, invest into your own country, in your own territory, into the small SMEs, because you can create trust and encourage others investors as well among that globe in doing that. And you know what they do, because you regulate the financial sector on the one hand side, and on the other hand, you know exactly what they are doing. Particular MDBs know the underlying. And if you would do so also in local currency, that would be of help. because it doesn't help us if you all invest just in dollar projects, euro projects, the hard currency one. We need to create trust and liquidity in local currency regimes as well. That is what I want to call for. And other than that, SMEs obviously needs also to have a chance to cope with the transition finance. And one chance is to have an acceptable, really acceptable voluntary carbon trading system in place. At the moment, 47 individuals, can you imagine? 47 exist among the globe. That's way too much. And probably that's the reason why it never creates a real accepted price also on carbon emissions. We should start, and this is my prediction, in the European, Middle East, African time zone. 2 hours right, 2 hours left, because we have everything. We have with Africa the spirit and the chance of tomorrow. And I liked also your comment, let's invest our industry in Africa. Let's make them use the energy there, which is produced in hydrogen, because when you produce it and you convert it and made also together with ammoniac, and then you lose 30%. When it is then back in Germany or when it is elsewhere in Europe, might be even with a heavy oil tanker shipped here, I don't see how sustainable that really is then, yes? And so therefore, let's make the change together. There's a lot to do, and we can just do it. If we look in the square, there is a corner of the politicians. They often kickstart, we need their support, but then let's take over in the other 3 corners. That is science, which hopefully then encourage the practice side in the real economy as well as in the financial industry, and trust on the innovation. We have not just innovation in the real economy, and I can assure you when we discussed, Esther, myself and 34 other colleagues in our advisory council to help the German government to define its policy through financial markets for sustainable finance, we are very happy to cope with you, and that's my last request I have to the audience here, to all the people on the internet who hopefully were following us today. Don't be shy. Trying to contact us, try to contact Esther and her colleagues, myself at DZ Bank, or my colleagues like Markus Praj. We would be happy to cope with you. And there's another institution sitting there again, the European Union. They are really, really happy to work with you together, because alone no one can do it. Thank you very much, and enjoy with us drinks and some food. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks very much.
Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. Ambitious, just together.